One of the brief readings I've given you this week is from the introduction to Wesley Salmon's Logic. And he's sort of setting out what he's going to be doing in the book and what the province of logic is. And he says something that I think is quite important right here. That when an argument is subjected to logical analysis, the question of relevance is at issue. Logic deals with the relation between premises and conclusion, not with the truth of the premises. So logic, he says, has to do with the question of relevance. And the question of relevance, I take him to mean whether or not the premises of an argument are actually relevant to the conclusion, in the sense that they give us reasons to believe that the conclusion is true. And logic can help with that. But it cannot help with whether or not the premises are actually true, or likely to be true, or could be true. I'm asking you to look at this very basic Khan Academy video. It's not bad that it's basic, but it's very basic, and it sets some things out in a perfectly good way about the question of soundness. So take a look at that, and what we see is that the way that philosophers approach arguments is that, first of all, an argument consists of at least two statements, right? Because there has to be at least one premise and there has to be a conclusion. And so a single statement can't be an argument. An argument has to be at least two statements, and usually is more, right? So an argument consists of premises and conclusion, and we say that an argument is sound when its premises are true, and it's valid, that is, when the conclusion actually does follow from the premises. But we deal with different types of argument, and there's different types of reasoning. Take a look here at this description of deductive reasoning, which is reasoning in which the premises logically entail the conclusion. And that means that, as we were saying in an earlier video, that in a deductively valid argument, the premises logically entail the conclusion, which can be described as if the premises are indeed true, then the conclusion cannot be false. Put a little less technically, in a deductively valid argument, if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true as well. Or if we are sure of the premises in a deductively valid argument, we can be equally sure of the conclusion. And that's in deductive reasoning or deductive arguments. Again, most of the arguments that we deal with, I mean, they're not really deductive arguments. I mean, they're inductive arguments. Arguments where we can make a pretty good case that something is true by giving reasons for it. But it wouldn't pass the deductive validity test, where if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. Most of the arguments that we deal with are inductive arguments in which we're making a case that the conclusion is true. And that case can be very strong, or it can be weak. But there's always at least the conceptual possibility that despite the strength of our argument, the conclusion could still be false. And that's what I was talking about in the one of the introductory videos about judgment. For instance, Salmon here says something interesting. The premises of an argument support the conclusion if the truth of the premises would constitute good reason for asserting that the conclusion is true. That's perfectly good description, let's say, in an inductive argument. But the whole problem is, what does this mean? That is, when do the premises constitute good reason for asserting that the conclusion is true? That is a matter of judgment. Take a look at some of the other materials here. This is really kind of introductory stuff. What is logic? Just gives you a basic idea of, what what logic does, the idea that logic is not the psychology of reasoning, which is a good point to make. Logic is not about how we actually do reason, but logic is the principles of correct reasoning. So there may be a big difference between how we actually do reason, typically, and how the rules of logic say we should, or what the rules of correct inference are. And that is an interesting distinction. I've also asked you to look at some things having to do with truth from the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy. There's some, looking at the reasoning side of it, just introducing ourselves to the idea that critical thinking is a lot of it is about reasoning and reasoning well. But I'm claiming that the other side of it is truth. But so it bears some. It's justified on some level to think about the concept of truth. So here's some basic. I'm just asking you to read the first few sections of this and to start thinking about truth in the way that logic thinks about truth, the way the philosophers think about truth. If you look at the definition of truth I gave you from Webster's, it has a lot of very distinct senses. Truth has a large moral component to its sense that we're going to ignore for the most part and focus on, I guess things like here, the idea that truth is the real fact of just principle or the real state of things. Truth is a correct opinion. One of the things that this Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy article does is lays out kind of some of the way the philosophers think of truth. And one of the problems here is what sort of things are true or false. And we get a whole list of candidates for what we could call true or false. And none of these things, for whatever differences there are, none of these things are things or people. Things can't be true or false. People can't be true or false. In some way or another, what can be true or false are something like statements. And there may be better candidates than statements, like propositions is a popular candidate in distinction to statements. But things can only be called true or false when they attempt to represent the world in some way. Like, not all things that we say are true or false. If I ask you a question, it's not the kind of thing that can be called true or false. In some way or another, I have to make an assertion of a certain sort. I have to articulate some belief that I have or opinion that I have, because there's always a possibility I could be wrong, and there's a possibility I could be right. But if I ask you, where's the mustard? I'm not making any kind of assertion. I'm not expressing any kind of representation or claim about reality. So what we learn pretty quickly is that the way the philosophers think of truth, truth is a matter pretty much either, truth is something that pertains to linguistic entities or maybe even mental entities of a certain sort. That is, if we make a statement about the way the world is, that statement is capable of being true or false. If we have a belief about the way the world is in whatever way, that belief is capable of being true or false. But you can't be true, and I can't be true or false in the way that we're using the word here. That would be covered by some of the other, Webster senses. For instance, fidelity, as in my true love. The word has rich history and has many different senses, incredibly important word. But we won't really be dealing with all of it.